The first time I saw her, she was standing in the middle of my crash site pulling a piece of my cockpit glass out of the dirt and holding it up to the twin moons like she'd never seen anything so strange in her life. Which I would later learn she hadn't. I was still strapped into the ejection harness, half buried in the soft loam of what my nav system, before it died, had identified as Sector 9 of the Valdris Rim, an uninhabited agricultural preserve in the outer fringe of the Therian Empire. Uninhabited. That was the word the nav system had used. Uninhabited by whom, the nav system had not bothered to clarify, because nav systems are literal-minded in the most inconvenient possible way. She was not human. That part was obvious even through the concussion blur. She stood about 5'8", which was roughly my height, but everything else was wrong by human standards. The pale luminescence that moved beneath her skin like slow lightning, the secondary eyelids that closed sideways when she blinked, the fingers that were one joint too long. She wore something that might have been a traveling cloak, deep charcoal gray, pulled close around her shoulders. No attendants. No escort. No weapons I could see, though I would later learn that was because she'd already hidden them. She turned the cockpit glass over in her hands, watching the moonlight bend through it, and she didn't look up when I groaned. "You're conscious," she said. Her Therian standard was clean, almost accent-free. She kept her eyes on the glass. I was beginning to wonder. What gave it away? The groaning. She set the glass down in the dirt very carefully as though returning something borrowed. Then she looked at me. The secondary eyelids did that sideways slide. "You crashed." "Yeah, I noticed." "Your ship is in 7 pieces." 7, that's better than I thought. She looked back at the wreckage field behind me and seemed to count. 8. 8 still better than I thought. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The harness caught me, which was the only reason I didn't faceplant into Therian soil. "Who are you?" She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't thinking, it's deciding. "Ven," she said finally. Not a full name, not a title. Just Ven, the way you'd give someone the least possible thing they'd asked for and feel satisfied you hadn't technically lied. I filed that away. "Marcus," I said. "Lieutenant Marcus Dale, Earth Expeditionary Corps Survey Division." I paused. "Formerly." "Formerly." I gestured at the 8 pieces of my ship. "I don't think they're going to give me another one of those." She studied me for a long moment. The luminescence in her skin did something I couldn't name, a subtle shift toward blue, away from whatever color it had been before. Later I'd learn to read that shift the way you learn to read weather. Later, not yet. "You are in an imperial agricultural preserve," she said. "Humans are not permitted in the Valdris Rim." My ship disagreed. "Your ship is in 8 pieces." In fairness, my ship also disagreed with gravity. It lost that argument too. I got my arms under me and this time made it to sitting, which felt like a personal victory. "Are you going to report me?" She was quiet again, that deciding quiet. "Not tonight," she said. She helped me out of the harness. She was stronger than she looked, which I suspected had something to do with the Therian standard gravity being about 60% of Earth's. Her muscles were built for different math. She half carried me to the edge of the field where the grass grew tall and silver in the moonlight, and she let me lean against a tree that had bark the color of old bone, and she sat down across from me in the dark like she had nowhere else to be. Which I would also later learn was exactly true. She had nowhere else to be. She had chosen nowhere, very deliberately, over somewhere. And the fact that I'd fallen out of the sky into her nowhere was either the worst luck in the galaxy or the kind of thing that only happens when the universe has decided to make a point. I was stuck for 3 weeks before my distress beacon, cycled through enough relay stations to reach anything that could respond. 3 weeks in a Therian agricultural preserve, with a woman who had given me one name and answered approximately 40% of my questions. The other 60% she deflected with a precision that told me she'd had practice. Not the anxious deflection of someone hiding something shameful, but the calm deflection of someone who had simply decided certain information was not yours to have yet, and who saw no reason to explain that decision. She brought me food. I don't know where she got it. She disappeared each morning before the first moon set and came back with things wrapped in broad, flat leaves, grain preparations, something that tasted like dried fruit soaked in something sweet, protein of unclear origin that I chose not to examine too closely. She never explained where she went. I never asked, because she had that look about her, the look of someone who will answer a question only after you've proven you can be trusted not to misuse the answer. On the fourth day, because I was bored and my ribs had stopped screaming, I took out the only thing that had survived the crash intact, a battered physical copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass, which I carried because my grandmother had given it to me, and I am not the kind of man who throws away things his grandmother gave him. I was reading it when Ven came back with the morning's food, and she stopped at the edge of the clearing and stared at the book the way she'd stared at the cockpit glass, with the focused attention of someone encountering a thing they'd heard described but never seen. "What is that?" "A book." "I know what a book is." She set the food down and moved closer, and I turned the book so she could see the cover. She read the title, her eyes moved across it, then back, then she looked up at me. "Leaves of Grass, that is a strange title." "It's poetry." "I know what poetry is." She said it the same way she'd said she knew what a book was, with a precision that meant, "I know the definition. I do not know the thing. There's a difference. Read some." I hadn't been expecting that. I looked at her for a moment, then I looked down at the book, and then I read her the first lines I'd opened to. Because when someone asks you to read them poetry, you don't stop to pick the perfect poem. You just read the one in front of you. "I am large," I said. "I contain multitudes." She stood very still. The luminescence under her skin did nothing for several seconds, and then it did something I hadn't seen before. It flared, briefly, gold, before settling back to its usual blue-white. "Say it again," she said. I said it again. She sat down across from me, cross-legged in the silver grass, and she held out her hand for the book. I gave it to her. She held it the way she'd held the cockpit glass, like something she didn't want to break. She didn't read it out loud. She read it with her eyes moving slowly, too slowly, like she wasn't just reading the words but doing something else with them, taking them apart to see how they worked. After a while she said, without looking up, "Your poets are strange." "They are." "He says he contains multitudes, as though the self is a space, a volume, a container." She looked up. "Your people think of the self as something that can be filled." "I guess we do." "Mine think of the self as something that must be defended." She looked back at the book. "Those are very different architectures." I didn't have anything useful to say to that, so I didn't say anything. She kept reading. The morning got later. The second moon went down. At some point, she set the book in her lap and looked out at the field where my ship was still in 8 pieces. And she said, very quietly, like she was telling the field rather than me, "I have not spoken to anyone in 43 days. "That's a long time." "Yes," a pause. "It is longer when you are used to speaking." "Were you used to speaking?" The deciding quiet again. Then, there were people whose job it was to listen to me. That is not the same thing as conversation. I thought about that. "No," I said, "it isn't." She picked up the book again. I let her. By the end of the first week, I could walk without the limp. By the end of the second week, I had fixed enough of the shelter half to make a structure that would keep the rain off, and Ven had contributed to this effort in the specific way of someone who knows better methods but is curious to see if yours will work. They did work. She seemed mildly surprised by this. I took that as a compliment. I found out she could fight on day 9, when something came out of the preserve's interior. A predator, low-slung and fast. the kind of thing that had been at the top of the local food chain for long enough to have opinions about new arrivals. It came in fast, and I did what a reasonable person does when something large and fast is coming at them. I put myself between it and the only cover in reach and braced for impact. Ven was between me and the predator before I finished bracing. She didn't look graceful doing it. That was the thing. It wasn't the fluid, practiced elegance of someone who'd trained to look impressive. It was fast and utilitarian, and she used her elbow in a way that a self-defense instructor would have called unconventional and an emergency room physician would have called effective. The predator recalculated. It left. Ven straightened up. The luminescence under her skin was doing something I was already starting to identify as agitation, a rapid flicker, more white than blue. She turned to look at me. "You didn't move," she said. There was something in it I couldn't quite name. Not accusation, something else. "You were between it and me. You didn't know I was going to move." I thought about that. "No," I said, "but I thought you probably would." She looked at me for a long moment. The flicker in her skin slowed. "Why?" "Because you've been bringing me food for 9 days when you didn't have to. That's not the behavior of someone who lets things happen to people they've decided to feed." I paused. "Also, you move like someone who knows how to do things. I've been watching you." Something happened in her expression that I didn't have enough data to translate yet. "That is very observant," she said, and went back to camp, and I followed her, and neither of us mentioned it again for 3 days. On day 12, I found a flat piece of hull plating from my ship, and I showed Ven what it was for, a playing surface. I used charred sticks to draw a grid. I cut small stones into rough shapes and explained the game, which was a version of Stone's End Cross that my father had taught me, simplified for materials available. Ven watched the explanation with the focused attention she brought to everything. The same attention she'd given the book, the same attention she'd given my shelter construction. Taking it apart to see how it worked. Then she played and she cheated immediately. Not in a subtle way. She moved a piece while I was looking at my own side of the board, and when I looked back it was in a position it hadn't been in before. "Ven." "Yes." "You moved that." "I don't know what you mean." I looked at her. She met my eyes with the secondary eyelids doing their slow sideways slide, and her expression was completely flat and would have been convincing on anyone who hadn't spent 11 days watching her face. There was something at the corner of her mouth that was not quite neutral. "You cheated," I said. "I optimized." "Those are not the same word." "I disagree." "In this game," I said carefully, "the point is not to be in the best position. The point is to get to the best position through the allowed moves." "Why?" She seemed genuinely curious. "If the goal is the best position, why should the path matter?" "Because the path is the game. The limitation is what makes it interesting. If you remove the rules, you're not playing the game. You're just arranging stones." She looked at the board. Something moved behind her eyes. "Your people play games you might lose," she said, "on purpose." "Yes." "Why?" I thought about how to explain this. Because winning doesn't mean anything if losing wasn't real. The risk is the point. That's what makes it. I stopped. "What?" "Fun," I said. "That's what makes it fun." She stared at me, not the analytical stare, something else. "I don't know that word," she said. "I know the translation, I don't know the thing." She read Leaves of Grass 3 more times in the next 3 days. I know because each time I woke up at the edge of the morning, when the first moon was still in the sky and the second hadn't risen yet. The book was gone from where I'd set it, and Ven was sitting at the far edge of the camp in that particular stillness she had, not sleeping, not meditating, but something else, something that looked like a person doing the internal equivalent of tugging at a knot. The book held in her hands, the luminescence under her skin doing slow, contemplative things. The first morning I went back to sleep and didn't mention it. The second morning I made myself busy with the shelter and didn't mention it. The third morning she brought me the book before I'd fully sat up and said, without preamble, "Page 73. I found page 73. She pointed to a section near the top of the page. I read it. "The question is permanent and unanswerable," I read. "It is not a problem to be solved. It is the nature of things to ask and the nature of living to go on asking." She waited. "Okay," I said. "What does he mean?" "He means that some things don't have answers, and that being alive doesn't require you to have the answers. It just requires you to keep asking." She was quiet for a moment. "On Thyrus," she said, "an unanswered question is a failure. In governance, in science, in court proceedings, an open question means an incomplete process." She looked at the page. "He is saying that the open question is not a failure. That it is the condition of being alive." "Yes. That is a very radical idea." Whitman was a radical kind of person. She held the book a moment longer, then handed it back. "He would have made a poor courtier," she said. "Probably. He'd have made a great one too for the wrong courts." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite the thing I was working toward, but something, a tributary of it. I noted it. The stone game became a regular feature of the afternoons. Once my ribs had healed enough that sitting on hard plating wasn't a test of character. Velindra stopped cheating, or rather, she stopped cheating in ways that I would notice, which I suspected were not the same thing. She played instead with the focused patience of someone who had decided to understand the rules before deciding whether to follow them, which was, I was learning, her approach to most things. She lost several games. She did not seem troubled by losing in the way I'd expected. No frustration, no pride recovering from the drop. She studied each lost game the way she'd studied the Whitman, moving pieces back to see the choice points, asking pointed questions about why I'd moved where I had. "You sacrificed that piece," she said on the 8th game. "It was not in danger. You gave it up deliberately. To control this section of the board. You traded a certain asset for a positional advantage." "Yes." She looked at the board. "In Thyrian strategy theory," she said, "that is considered poor play. An asset is an asset. You hold assets. In human strategy, sometimes you spend assets to make the board harder to play against. You change the shape of the game rather than just trying to win the game in front of you." She stared at the board for a long time. "You are playing a different game than the one on the board," she said. "Sometimes. The piece you sacrifice, does it matter?" "It matters that you choose the right one." I looked at the board. "And it matters that you choose it, that you don't just lose it." The gold in her skin flickered briefly. "That," she said very quietly, "is the most important thing you have said to me." I didn't ask why. I had a suspicion, and I filed it next to everything else I was filing, the picture of Velindra assembling, piece by piece, not from what she told me but from what she noticed and what she held on to and what she read 3 times in the morning light. I taught her fun on day 15. Not deliberately. I was trying to explain the concept and I was failing, because explaining fun is like explaining color to someone who's only ever read descriptions of color. The word doesn't do the work, the experience does. So I stopped trying to explain it and I did something that, in retrospect, was either brilliant or deeply undignified, and I will maintain forever that it was brilliant. I made her laugh. Not intentionally. I was demonstrating how to play the stone game with the rules followed correctly, which required me to lean across the board in a way that overestimated my post-crash flexibility, and I went sideways into the silver grass in a tangle of limbs that was objectively not elegant. I lay there for a moment, staring at the alien sky, and from above me I heard a sound. I turned my head. Ven had her hand over her mouth. The luminescence under her skin had gone fully gold, the first time I'd seen it do that and hold it. Her secondary eyelids were doing something complicated that I would later understand was the Thyrian equivalent of wide eyes, the involuntary thing your face does when your body is surprised into expression. And from behind her hand came a sound that her species was apparently not accustomed to making, a caught, startled, reluctant thing that wanted very much not to be what it was. She was laughing. She didn't seem to know what was happening to her. I stayed in the grass and I watched her fight it and lose, and the sound got less reluctant and more real, and the gold in her skin stayed and spread, and I thought, there it is. There it is, whatever she was before she came to this field with one name and 43 days of silence. There is the thing underneath all of that. I started laughing too, eventually, which made no objective sense given that I was lying in alien grass with bruised ribs and no ship, but sense had very little to do with it. When we'd both stopped, she sat down next to me, not across, next to, and she looked at the sky for a moment before she said, "I don't do that." "You just did." "I don't," she sounded almost troubled. "It is not," she stopped, started again. "It is considered undignified." She was quiet. "Then," I said, "what are you when you're not being dignified?" The deciding quiet, the longest one yet. "I don't know," she said, like the answer surprised her. "I've never been permitted to find out." We lay in the silver grass for a while. The second moon rose. Something small and harmless made sounds in the field. I didn't push for more than she'd given. I'd learned that pushing then produced nothing but silence. You had to leave space, and the thing you wanted to know would move into the space on its own, cautiously, the way wild things come to still water. I thought about what it meant, what I'd seen. The gold, the sound, the hand that had flown up to cover it before she'd even understood what was happening to her body. In 19 years of the Expeditionary Corps, I had done 7 survey missions across 4 star systems, and I had met 17 distinct sapient species at various stages of diplomatic relation. I had never seen an alien laugh before, not the way Velindra had laughed, not that spontaneous, uncalculated, slightly helpless thing that humans do when something gets past their guard. I had seen ceremonial performances of pleasure, formal expressions of amusement, the deliberate social signals that pass for joy in a culture that has domesticated its own emotional expression. This was not any of those things. This was the sound of someone discovering they had something they'd been told they didn't have. I'd seen that once before, actually, in a very different context. A recruit in my first cohort who'd been told her whole childhood that she wasn't strong enough for field work, and who had, on a particularly miserable training march in the rain, beaten the course time by 40 seconds, and then stood at the finish line making a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh and was entirely real. The look on her face. That look on Velindra's face. People who have been told they don't have something when they find it. I kept that thought to myself. After a while she said, "My name is not Ven." "I know." "You," she turned her head to look at me. "How long have you known?" "Since you told it to me." I looked at the sky. "Ven is a shortening, something you can give to anyone, a name you'd use if you wanted to be present without being placed." Silence. "You are very observant," she said. It was the second time she'd said it, and it sounded different this time, less analytical. "Marcus is actually my name," I said. "You can have the whole thing." I heard her exhale, not quite a breath, not quite a laugh, somewhere in between. "Velindra," she said, "third vessel of the Thyrian imperial bloodline, daughter of the Radiant Throne. Missing as of 43 days ago from the capital city of Thyrus Prime." A pause. "Presumed, I don't know what I'm presumed. I didn't wait to find out." I sat up slowly. I looked at her. She was watching the moons with the flat expression she wore when she was working very hard at not showing something. "You ran away," I said. I removed myself from a situation that was not sustainable. Then I waited. She turned. "You ran away." The gold came back into her skin, brief and complicated, and then went away again. "Yes," she said, "I ran away." She told me the rest of it over the next 2 days. In pieces, the way you take apart something valuable that's been locked, and you're not sure how badly you might break it by opening it wrong. She was third in line for the Radiant Throne, which in ordinary circumstances would have made her significance negligible. A backup to a backup, ceremonial, present at state functions, spoken for in a succession treaty that had been arranged before she was born. But the first vessel had died 8 months ago, in an accident that Velindra did not believe was an accident. And the second vessel had accepted a treaty marriage to a military caste family that had been loyal to a particular faction of the imperial court for 3 generations. The kind of family that did not accumulate that kind of loyalty by being innocent. Which left Velindra as the next most convenient piece on a board being played by people who were very good at the game, and who did not observe the rule about moving pieces while the other player wasn't looking. They were going to use me, she said, not harm me, use me as a symbol, as a signature, as a thing that makes other things legitimate. She turned a small stone over in her hands. We were sitting at the board, not playing, just sitting near something familiar. Do you understand the difference between being used and being harmed? Yes. Yeah, I said, I understand that difference. She looked at me. Have you experienced it? I thought about the survey division and the admiralty and the way certain missions got assigned to certain pilots who were good enough to survive them and expendable enough not to matter if they didn't. Close enough, I said. She nodded once slowly. I thought if I simply remove myself, the board changes. The piece they needed is not where they put it. They have to recalculate. She set the stone down. I thought I had more time before they recalculated. How much time do you think you have left? She was quiet. Not much. The Thyrian imperial reach is thorough, and I left a trail. She paused. I am not experienced at disappearing. You disappeared for 43 days. Into an uninhabited agricultural preserve. That is not difficult, but they will have expanded the search by now. They will have sent the Reach Guard. She looked at me. When your distress beacon reaches a relay, what happens? Earth Expeditionary Corps comes to get me. How long? Probably another week. She nodded again. Not worried, she didn't do worried. She did precise and she did prepared, and she did the thing where she looked at a situation and decided what was possible and what wasn't and moved toward what was. But there was something underneath the precision now that hadn't been there before. Something that was aware of the clock. You should leave with your people when they come, she said. What will you do? I haven't decided. Then. She turned. What do you want? I said. Not what's strategic. Not what protects the succession or balances the court. What do you want? The longest deciding quiet of all of them. I want, she stopped, started again. The luminescence shifted gold and held, and she looked at the stone on the board and she said it quietly, like testing the weight of something she'd never actually lifted before. I want to find out what I am when no one is watching. I want to know what I think when no one needs me to think something specific. I want to know what it sounds like when she stopped. When you laugh, I said. She looked at me. Something in her face had come loose from its usual arrangements. She looked younger. She looked like someone who had just named the thing they were afraid of and found that naming it hadn't broken them. Yes, she said. When I laugh. On day 17, she asked me about Earth. Not in the way diplomats ask. Not the formal inventory of human culture that Thyrian liaisons had been running for the 40 years since first contact. Not the geopolitical and military capacity questions that I knew the Empire cared about. She asked the way she'd asked about everything in the preserve, piece by piece, from the specific to the general, turning each piece over to see the shape of it. Your grandmother, she said, the one who gave you the book. Yes. What was she like? I hadn't been expecting that question. I looked at the sky. We developed a habit of these evening conversations, sitting on the hull plating with the first moon already up and the second coming, talking our way through the dark. She was stubborn, I said. The kind of stubborn that makes no distinction between important things and unimportant things. She was just as stubborn about the way she made tea as she was about the things that actually mattered. Is that a human trait? Stubbornness, pretty common, yeah. Is it considered a virtue? I thought about it. Depends on what you're being stubborn about. I paused. She was stubborn about people. She thought every person was worth the trouble of getting to know correctly, not just the version of them that was available on the surface. I turned the book over in my hands. She'd have read you like a project. A project. A good kind, the kind worth spending time on. I looked at her. She would have liked you. Velindra was quiet for a moment. The gold in her skin was doing something slow and careful. No one has said that to me before, she said, in those terms. What terms? Personal terms. Not your position would be an asset to this relationship or your presence honors this occasion, but I think this specific person would have liked this specific you. She paused. It's strange. It feels like something being handed to me. It is, I said. You can keep it. She held the silence the way she held the book, like something she didn't want to break. On day 18, the night before the Reach Guard arrived, she told me about the first vessel's death. Not the politics of it, she'd told me those on day 14. The thing she'd held back, she'd been there. Not in the room, but in the building, 3 corridors away, and she'd heard the sound of the accident before anyone else had. She'd run toward it. She had been the first person, of all the people in that enormous imperial building, to understand what had happened and what it meant, and she'd had approximately 30 seconds of understanding it alone before the rest of the court arrived. 30 seconds, she said. I stood there and I knew, and no one else knew yet, and I thought, I have to decide now what kind of person I am going to be about this. She paused. Because the kind of person who looks at what happened and sees a threat to herself and calculates how to protect herself from the next one, that kind of person survives, probably. And the kind of person who looks at what happened and decides to find out the truth of it, and say it plainly, regardless of who is inconvenienced. She stopped. That kind of person ends up in an agricultural preserve, I said. Yes. You chose the agricultural preserve. In 30 seconds, yes. I didn't entirely know that's what I was choosing, but yes. I thought about 30 seconds. Your instinct was right, I said. You can't know that. You're here, aren't you? Instead of wherever they'd have put you if you'd stayed and played the safe game. I looked at the field. And tomorrow you're going to use their own old law to make the board work differently. That's not the outcome of someone whose instinct was wrong. She was quiet for a long time. Then Marcus. Yeah. Thank you for waiting through my silences. I looked at her. Thank you for ending them. The gold stayed until we both went asleep. The Reach Guard found us on day 19. I heard them first. The frequency signature of Tharian military craft is distinctive, a low harmonic that rattles in the sinuses if you know what to listen for, and I was already pulling Velindra to her feet when the first cruiser cleared the tree line to the south. There were 3 of them. The Reach Guard insignia was stark on the hull, the radiant throne seal, angular and cold. They landed in the field among the 8 pieces of my ship, which they apparently did not care about. And 6 guards in full formal armor came out with the air of people who have been searching for something for 19 days and are very tired and not inclined toward flexibility. Behind them came a Tharian in robes rather than armor, older, high-ranked, with the formal markings on his face that indicated court appointment. He looked at the camp we'd made. He looked at the book lying open in the silver grass. He looked at the stone game still laid out on the piece of hull plating. And then he looked at Velindra with an expression that was trying to be relief and kept sliding into something more complicated. "Third vessel," he said. "The Empire has been searching." I know, Velindra said. Her voice had gone back to the formal register I hadn't heard since the first night. Flat, precise, defended. But her skin, I could see it, and he probably couldn't, or wouldn't know how to read it if he could. Her skin was doing the rapid agitation flicker, too fast, too white. Who sent you? The court, the throne, your safety is. Who specifically? He paused, recalculated. The second vessel's house arranged the search. Velindra's luminescence went cold. I see. Third vessel, if you'll come with us. She's not going anywhere. I said it before I'd finished thinking it through, which is either a character flaw or something else. I'm still not entirely sure. Every guard in the field turned toward me. I was a medium-height human male standing in front of a broken camp in an agricultural preserve, which is not typically an imposing position. I didn't have a weapon. What I had was 19 days of watching Velindra do the deciding quiet, and understanding that no one had ever waded through it with her without wanting something from the answer. I didn't want anything from the answer. That was the whole point. She has not been harmed, I said to the court representative. She has been here by choice. If the Empire's concern is her safety, I can tell you she is safe. If the Empire's concern is her presence at a particular location by a particular date for a particular purpose, I looked at him steadily. That is a different concern. And that is her decision to make. Silence in the field, a lot of it. The representative stared at me with the expression of someone encountering a variable they hadn't included in any of their calculations. You are a human, he said. Lieutenant Marcus Dale, Earth Expeditionary Corps. I paused. Survey Division, formerly probably. You have no authority in this matter. I know. I looked at Velindra. She does. She was looking at me. The gold was back, full, strong, the way it had been when she was laughing in the grass. She held my gaze for a moment, and I watched the decision move across her face the way weather moves, visible at the edges first and then everywhere at once. She turned to the representative. Tell me what has happened to the succession inquiry, she said, and her voice was the most precise thing I'd ever heard. Not defended, not armored, precise the way a very sharp tool is precise because it knows what it's for. Tell me who authorized the search. Tell me the full composition of the house that sent you. And tell me what treaty language is currently being drafted regarding the third vessel's position. She paused. Tell me all of it and I will decide. The representative opened his mouth, closed it. I am not a piece on a board, Velindra said. I am the third vessel of the Thyrian imperial bloodline. I am also, she glanced at the book in the grass, at the stone game on the hull plating. I am also apparently someone who contains multitudes. She looked back at the representative. So speak or leave, and I will take the decision out of your hands entirely. He spoke. It took an hour. He spoke and Velindra listened, and I sat on a piece of hull plating and didn't interrupt, because this was not my board to play and I knew it. But every time she needed to pause, every time the information landed somewhere that required a moment of stillness to process, she looked at me, not for confirmation, not for permission, like checking a point on a map, making sure north was where she'd left it. The picture that assembled itself from an hour of court language and careful omission was exactly what she'd suspected. The first vessel's death had not been an accident. The second vessel was not only allied with the military house, but had been the one to quietly confirm that the search for Velindra was a recovery operation, not a rescue. The treaty language being drafted would, if she returned voluntarily, require her presence at a ceremony in 30 days that would functionally transfer all meaningful succession rights to the second vessel's house in exchange for language about Velindra's continued comfort. Her comfort, as though she were furniture being repositioned. When the representative finished, Velindra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have told me everything I asked for. Third vessel. You have also told me things you didn't intend to." The fact that you told me all of it suggests that the people who sent you believe I have no options outside of compliance." She looked at him with an expression that was not unkind. It was the expression of someone who understands why a mistake was made and has decided not to belabor the explanation. "They are wrong. The succession is a matter of Thyrian law, which I have spent the past 19 days reviewing in considerable detail, because when one has nothing but time and a human's poetry to read, one eventually returns to the texts one knows." She stood up. She was not armored. She was in a traveling cloak that had been through 19 days of an agricultural preserve, and she had grass from my accidental fall still somewhere in her hair, and she stood in the middle of that field like someone who had stopped needing the armor. Thyrian succession law has a provision for third vessel independent action in cases of threat to the primary lineage. It's old law, pre-empire old, almost never invoked. But it does not require the presence of a second vessel's proxy at any point in the invocation process. She paused. "I will be invoking it." The representative stared. "That law requires a witness who is not of Thyrian citizenship." "Yes." She turned. She looked at me. Something in her face that I didn't have a word for yet. I was working on the vocabulary. "Lieutenant Dale." "Yeah. Would you be willing to serve as a witness to a succession invocation under old imperial law? I recognize this is not in your job description." I thought about my job description: survey division, scout craft, geological surveys of uninhabited systems. The job description that had ended when my ship became 8 pieces of debris. I thought about my grandmother's book of poetry lying open in alien grass. I thought about the sound Velindra had made in the moment before she laughed, the catching, reluctant, honest sound of someone discovering something they'd been told they didn't have. "Sure," I said. The gold came back into her skin and stayed. The guard who was standing closest to me during all of this was a young one. I could tell by the way he held himself, still a little stiff in the ceremonial armor, not yet habituated to the weight of it. He was watching Velindra with a look I recognized, not the calculation of the courtiers or the politics of the representative. He was watching her the way my grandmother used to watch things she found genuinely surprising, like someone seeing a thing correctly for the first time. I filed that away too. I won't explain the invocation in detail because I don't fully understand it. It involved Velindra speaking in Old Imperial, which is a language approximately 3 people currently alive are fluent in, and the representative visibly deciding at several points that arguing was inadvisable. The guards stood in the field and looked at their boots. I stood next to Velindra and said, "Witness affirmed." At the moments, she indicated and tried to look like someone who belonged at a Thyrian imperial succession invocation, which is a difficult thing to look like when you are a human in a torn flight suit. What it meant, functionally, was this. Velindra had invoked the right of independent succession action, which created a legal structure around her position that the second vessel's house could not dismantle without triggering a broader inquiry. An inquiry that, given the circumstances of the first vessel's death, would go places they very much did not want it to go. It didn't solve everything. It didn't hand her the throne. What it did was change the board. The piece they'd needed was not where they'd put it, and it had moved itself into a position that, legally, could not be moved again without considerable cost. The representative left with the guards. He did not look happy. Velindra watched them go until the cruisers were past the tree line, and then she sat down in the silver grass. Not gracefully, just sat down, the way someone sits when their legs have decided enough is enough, and she looked at the sky. I sat next to her, not across, next to. "That was impressive," I said. "I had 19 days. She was quiet for a moment, and a human who told me that the path is the game. I didn't say anything. "The limitation is what makes it interesting," she said. "I spent a great deal of time in the past 19 days being angry about the limitations. I was thinking about them incorrectly." She paused. "I thought I was playing a game where my opponent makes the rules. I was wrong. The rules exist. They are old enough that my opponent forgot about some of them. That is, she stopped. What? That is very useful information. Yeah, I said, it is. We sat in the grass as the second moon rose. The field had gone quiet again. After a while she said, without looking at me, "You could have stayed out of it. When the representative arrived, it was not your matter." I know. You intervened without being asked. I know. Why? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about what she'd said about Therian thinking, the self as something to be defended. I thought about what Whitman had said about being large, about containing multitudes. I thought about the sound she'd made before she laughed, the moment before she knew what was happening to her, when it was the most honest sound in the field. Because you've been bringing me food, I said. Because you taught me the word for the agricultural preserve insect that keeps biting my left ankle. Because you cheated at Stone's End Cross and the look on your face when I called you on it was the most human expression I've ever seen on a non-human face. I paused. Because you asked me to read you more Whitman and you listened to it like it was doing something to you and you didn't apologize for that. I looked at her. Because you laughed. And because I don't think anyone has ever let you laugh before without needing something from it. She was looking at the sky. The gold under her skin was doing something quieter than I'd seen before, not the bright flare, not the agitation flicker. Something slow and warm that I didn't have a word for in any language, including hers. Sharing your fears, she said very quietly, makes you vulnerable. She paused. And vulnerability is the birthplace of love, I said. Some poet said that, not Whitman. I don't remember who. She turned her head to look at me. The secondary eyelids did the slow sideways slide, and she was wearing the expression I didn't have words for yet, the one I'd been building vocabulary for since day 4. And I thought that I was going to have a lot more time to work on that vocabulary, because my beacon had been answered by EEC relay, and the rescue craft would be here in 6 days, and she would be here in 6 days, and the question of what came after 6 days was not something either of us had addressed yet, and probably needed to. Marcus, she said. Yeah. The poem you read me, on day 4. Whitman. I have been reading it. Every time you were not using it, I have read it 12 times. She paused. I have a question. Okay. When he says he is large, she looked back at the sky. Does he mean that the capacity for containing multitudes is something one is born with, or something one acquires? I thought about it. I think it's something you find out you have, I said, when someone gives you the space to find it. She was quiet for a long moment. You gave me the space, she said. You gave me food and killed a predator. I think we're even. The gold spread, and there it was again, that sound, quieter this time, more certain of itself, not fighting to get out but simply present. Herself present, the way a thing is present when it's been let out of the container that was too small for it. She laughed and the silver grass held it, and neither of the moons went anywhere. I sat there and I let myself have the moment, not in the calculating way, not filing it away. Just present in it. The way she'd taught me without meaning to, by spending 24 days being more completely present in a crashed ship field than anyone I'd ever met had been in any room I'd ever shared. She didn't owe me that lesson. She'd given it anyway. The gold in her skin in the moonlight, the grass holding the shape of where we'd been, the sound of her laugh already less startled than it had been 10 days ago, more itself, more hers. The way a voice sounds different once it stops apologizing for the space it takes up. I thought about multitudes, about how a person can go 43 days thinking they have lost something fundamental, and then fall sideways into alien grass and find out they haven't lost it at all. It was just waiting in a field somewhere for the right confluence of circumstances to surface it. A crash, a book, someone who didn't need you to be anything other than what you were. I thought about what Vasquez was going to say when she arrived. I thought about the paperwork. I thought about Velindra citing old law to people who'd forgotten it existed, and the look on the representative's face, and the young guard watching her with his grandmother's eyes. I thought, I am large. The thought arrived complete, not constructed. It was just there, the way true things are. I contained this, all of this. The crash and the 24 days and the book and the stone game and the sound of her laughing in the silver grass at night. I contained all of it, and it was not too much. It was exactly as much as there was room for. That, I thought, was what Whitman meant. That was the whole thing. The rescue craft arrived on day 24, 2 days early, because the EEC had not known about the Reach Guard's visit and the pilot, a woman named Vasquez who had been on my survey cohort for 3 years, and who I therefore trusted with my life, had punched the drive harder when the beacon signal showed multiple Tharian military signatures near my position. Vasquez came out of the craft with her hand near her sidearm and stopped when she saw Velindra. Then she looked at the camp we'd built. The book in the grass, the stone game, the two of us sitting on hull plating eating something wrapped in broad flat leaves. Dale, she said. Hey, Vasquez. There were Tharian military ships. Yeah, they left. She looked at Velindra. Velindra looked back with the secondary eyelids doing the slow sideways slide. Vasquez looked at me. Who is this? This is Velindra, I said. Third vessel of the Tharian imperial bloodline. She's been keeping me alive for 3 weeks. I paused. Also, she's invoking old imperial succession law, and she needs a human witness present for the next phase, and I volunteered, so there's going to be some paperwork. Vasquez stared at me for a long moment. The paperwork, she said, is going to be tremendous. I know. Command is going to want to. I know. There are protocols for. Vasquez, I looked at her. The third vessel of the Tharian imperial bloodline spent 43 days in an agricultural preserve learning that she is large and contains multitudes. She ran from a succession apparatus that was trying to use her as a signature rather than a person. She has requested my presence as a human witness, while she takes that apparatus apart from the inside using laws they forgot existed. I paused. The paperwork is going to be tremendous. I understand that. I accept that. Are you taking me in or not? Vasquez looked at Velindra. Velindra looked back. Can you actually do what he described? Vasquez said. Take it apart from the inside. Yes, Velindra said. I believe I can. Are you going to take long? The invocation itself is time-sensitive. 90 days, she paused. After that, I intend to take considerably longer. Vasquez looked at me. I looked at the grass, at the book, at the stone game, at the shelter that had held through 3 weeks of agricultural preserve weather. You know, Vasquez said, there's going to be a formal inquiry about the crash. I know. You're going to have to explain why the survey mission went off course. Gravitational anomaly in Sector 9. My instruments malfunctioned. I attempted emergency procedures. I ended up in an uninhabited agricultural preserve. I paused, mostly uninhabited. Vasquez looked between us for a long moment. Something in her expression did the thing where it was trying to be professional and kept sliding somewhere else. Get in the craft, Dale, she said. I picked up the book. I looked at Velindra. She had already stood up, already folded the traveling cloak with the precise economy of movement that was entirely her own, already settled into the posture of someone who has made a decision and has given it her full weight. But she was looking at the field, at the 8 pieces of my ship, at the path we'd worn in the silver grass between the camp and the game board and the shelter, with the expression I had a better vocabulary for now. Like someone memorizing the shape of a beginning. Ready, I said. She turned. The gold was steady, warm, unhurried. I am large, she said. Yeah, I said, you are. She walked past me toward the craft, and I followed her, and Vasquez watched us both with the expression of someone composing a very interesting incident report, and the field held the shapes of us a little while longer before the silver grass moved back into place and covered them. The second moon was rising when we lifted off. Through the craft's rear view screen, I watched the field go small and then smaller, and then become part of the curve of the planet. And I held the book against my chest, and I thought about multitudes, and I thought about paths, and I thought about a woman who had spent 43 days in a field deciding who she was without anyone watching, and then 24 days deciding it again, in front of someone who wasn't asking her to be anything in particular. She was sitting across from me in the crew compartment, not across, next to, and she was looking out the view screen at the planet below, and her skin was doing the warm, steady gold that I was still building vocabulary for, and she said without looking at me, "Marcus, yeah, when this is over, the invocation. When the law has done what law can do," she paused, "what do you do next?" I thought about the survey division, the formerly, the 8 pieces of a ship in a field that was already behind us. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm open to suggestions." She looked at me. She was wearing the expression I finally had words for, the one that meant she was deciding something, and she already knew what she decided, and she was giving herself one last moment with the decision before she said it out loud and it became real. "I would like to show you more of the rim," she said. "There are systems that haven't been surveyed, officially." A pause. "I know people who can arrange credentials. Thyrian Imperial people. Some of them," the corner of her mouth. "Some of them human. That sounds like it might be complicated. Most things worth doing are." She looked back at the view screen. The planet was a green-silver curve below us, agricultural and old and full of fields where unexpected things happened. "You told me the path is the game," she said. "The limitation is what makes it interesting." "I did say that." "I believe you were right." She glanced at me. "I also believe you were losing that game badly even before I moved the piece. I was going to make a comeback." "You were not." "I had a strategy." "You had hope," she said. "That is not the same thing as a strategy, but it might be more useful." She turned back to the view screen. The gold stayed. "Show me the other human poets." "When we have time." "All of them." "I contain multitudes," she said. "I have the capacity." I laughed. She let herself laugh too, the full sound of it, no hand over her mouth, no deciding quiet before it, just present, real, hers. Vasquez, from the pilot's seat, said nothing. But I saw her shoulders do the things shoulders do when someone is smiling and trying not to show it. Through the view screen I watched the Valdris rim fall away beneath us, the agricultural preserves making a patchwork of silver green across the curve of the planet, and I thought about all the other fields down there, all the other uninhabited except by who exactly sectors, all the other systems the survey division had marked on its charts in careful neutral language that didn't begin to describe what might be found in them. I'd been doing this job for 7 years, finding rocks mostly, geological samples, atmospheric composition readings, the occasional extremophile microorganism that would spend the next decade in an EEC lab and eventually generate 3 academic papers that nobody but other academic researchers would read. Important work, useful work. Work that felt sometimes like arranging stones on a board with no opponent. I thought about that young guard in the ceremonial armor. I thought about the representative's face when Velindra had cited the old law, the specific expression of a man who had been playing a game, and discovered that the board had more dimensions than he'd been accounting for. I thought about Vasquez, who had punched the drive harder when she'd seen Thyrian military signatures near my position, because that is the kind of person she is, and I had not known until she did it that I had been hoping she would. People keep surprising you if you let them. That's a thing my grandmother would have said. She had a lot of things like that, observations that sounded like obvious common sense until you were in the situation they applied to. And then they were suddenly the most important words anyone had ever said. We left the Valdris Rim behind us and took everything we'd made in that field with us. The book, the game, the vocabulary I was still building, the laugh that had changed shape over 24 days from something reluctant into something that knew exactly what it was. And I thought that the paperwork was going to be tremendous, and I thought that I didn't mind at all.